have a yard sign list. David, David, you don't have to worry about this. I'm going to put it back, okay? All righty. Hey, you can keep going. Cha-cha-cha. David, it's on? Is this working? Is this working? Is this working? This is our new sound system. Our first Shabbat with the new sound system. That's right. Oh, I didn't ask anybody to light candles. Dorit and Yossi. להדליק את הנרות? עוד מעט, לא עכשיו. לא צריך להיות עכשיו. עוד מעט, אני אקריא אותם. That was Hebrew, everybody. And that's what we're going to be doing. It wasn't good Hebrew, but it was Hebrew. Thank you. Yeah, I can read this. Thank you. Thank you, yes. All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome back. Just a program note. We are, yes, sir, yes. Hello. Hi. With love. We're back this week. We will be here next week. Lior, oh gosh, I'm going to mess up her name. Our Shlicha. Shlicha is the representative of Israel, cultural representative from Israel, who works at the Federation, is going to be speaking to us. We have a long-standing relationship with this particular office, the Shlichut, the emissary's office. It's emissary sounds very, very fancy, but Shaliach is like somebody that's sent to do something, and she's an incredible person. Her brother died during the events of October 7th. He was a soldier responding to the invasion, and he did not live through it. She had just started here. We have a really strong relationship with this whole business because we wouldn't have a movement in Israel if it weren't for one of the shlichot who came here, and that was Sivan Mas. You all know her as a humanistic rabbi in Israel, but she met Sherwin because of her work here. And that was some time ago, I know, but many of you probably remember her. Anyway, that's next week. The week after, we are off, not because it's Halloween, although that's lovely and everything, but because my daughter is getting married. That's right. And while we're talking about wonderful things, though we have not heard word yet that all of the fallen hostages have been returned from Israel, there are still 19 bodies outstanding. We welcomed home the Jewish world this week, the 20 living hostages. And we've had this up now for 2 years, and now we don't need it anymore. And you can applaud for that. No, there are 19 that are still missing. All right, well, we have a brand new projector. Isn't that nice and bright and pretty to go with our sound system? And we're going to begin our service with slide number 1, Arthur, if you will. Light has always guided us, illuminating the way through times of darkness and celebrating moments of joy. Tonight, as we kindle these Shabbat lights, may they remind us of the strength we carry within and the responsibilities we share beyond ourselves. May these Shabbat lights bring warmth to our hearts and clarity to our minds. As the flames rise, may they inspire us to act with courage, compassion, and urgency, bringing light to those who need it most. May we be blessed with light, peace, and purpose. And now I'd like to invite Dorit and Yossi Ben-Gal to light our Shabbat candles.
Baruch Haor Ba'olam. Baruch Haor Ba'adam. Baruch Haor Ba'shalom. Ba'shalom. Baruch Haor. Baruch Haor. Ba'Shabbat.
Our readers tonight are Jean Claridge, Audrey Pleasant, Charlie Paul, Sarah Markowitz, Suzanne Paul, and Beth DeZoden-Fuchs.
As the week slips behind us, we open the door to Shabbat, inviting its calm beauty into our lives. Shabbat does not come to us from beyond, but it is something we create, a time to pause, to breathe, to find joy in one another's company, and meaning in a shared experience. By gathering on Shabbat, we transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. In this time, we celebrate the tradition of rest and renewal, softening the burdens of the week and strengthening the connections we share. Let us embrace this Shabbat that we create together as a community of humanistic Jews.
Lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, la Shabbat. Lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, la Shabbat. Naria, naria, la yom simchatenu, nikadma b'shalom. Naria, naria, layom simchatenu, bismirot naria lo. Lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, la Shabbat. Lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, la Shabbat. Naria, naria, layom simchatenu, nikadma b'shalom. Naria, naria, layom simchatenu, bismirot naria lo. Lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, la Shabbat. Lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, lachuna ranana, la Shabbat.
To cross the threshold of this room on Shabbat is to enter a place free from the demands of our everyday lives. We step away from our daily routines in an attempt to gain perspective on where we have been and where we are going. At other times, in other places, we may feel fragile and alone, yet here we join together to find strength, to build community, as we look with wonder at the universe and seek our place within its vastness. To this place we come to lengthen our perspective.
To this place we come to question and explore.
In this place we awaken our imaginations.
In this place we draw strength as we allow ourselves to dream.
Together we share the challenge of an ever-changing world, a world often beyond our control. Together we seek to find meaning, calm our anxieties, understand our purpose. Together we share the burdens and blessings of responsibility. Together we bond as a community, a true gift of Shabbat.
Yaakov, Mishkinotecha Yisrael, Ma tovu Oalecha Yaakov, Oalecha Yaakov, Mishkinotecha Yisrael. Likrat Shabbat, lechu v'neilcham, lechu v'neilcham. Ki mekor habracha, mekor habracha. Tovu oalecha Yaakov, Eka Yaakov, Mishkinotecha Yisrael, Ma tovu oalecha Yaakov, oalecha Yaakov, Mishkinotecha Yisrael.
Our capacity to pursue lives of integrity depends upon our freedom of inquiry. One person's truth may be another's heresy. Unfettered investigation is the only way to acknowledge. We may each be free to find our way. We must be free to find our way, sorry. Baruch Spinoza put it this way: people's habits of mind differ. Some more readily embrace one form of faith and some another. This is because what moves one person to pray may move another to scoff. I include that all people should be free to choose for themselves the foundations of their creed. Faith should be judged only by its fruits.
There's a place with answers we are seeking. There's a place to find our light of hope. Where's the strength to realize our vision? Yishmachom b'tochenu, Yishmachom b'tochenu. Look within yourself, you'll find it there. There's a place with wisdom that can guide us. There's a place where we know what's right or wrong. Where's the path to peace that we all long for? Yishmakom b'tochenu, Yishmakom b'tochenu. Look within yourself, you'll find it there.
We spend our days searching for meaning, for wisdom, for direction to guide us forward. We look to the world around us, to teachers, to history, and to the voices of our ancestors. We ask, how do we find the courage to face the future? We ask, how do we choose which paths to take? We ask, how do we do these things while remaining true to ourselves? What we seek is closer than we think. The spark of understanding, the source of hope, the clarity to choose the right path. These live within us, waiting to be recognized and waiting to be embraced. Shabbat is a time to pause and gather our strength. It is time to think about who we are and what we can make of our lives. On Shabbat, we take a moment to set aside the noise,
the distractions, and the demands of the week. Shabbat invites us to return to ourselves and contemplate the questions that our lives are posing. As we enter this special time, let us accept the invitation to open our hearts, quiet our doubts, and remember this. The capacity for wisdom, for courage, and for service is already there inside us.
נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים. נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים. אלה שערים לשלום, נפתח לנו ונבוא בם. אלה שערים לשלום, נפתח לנו ונבוא בם. נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים. נפתח לנו שערי צדק, חן וחסד ורחמים.
Every philosophy of life distinguishes between what is reality and what is illusion. It is sometimes hard to make that distinction. Our needs get in the way of our better judgment. There are certain painful truths that we try to avoid. There are certain facts that make us uncomfortable. There are certain desires that make us feel guilty. The world is not always the way we want it to be. Death, injustice, and change are not always the most popular alternatives. Illusion is very tempting. Supernatural worlds in particular are seductive. They avoid death, they make reward the just, they resist change, they are full of the power we feel we lack. When we are feeling vulnerable, they are easy to believe in. To accept nature, its beautiful side and its ugly side, its useful side and its harmful side, is not easy. To accept the universe with all of its grandeur and with all of its vast indifference to our personal fate is more than difficult. But it makes us strong, and it makes us see that we need to rely more on ourselves and on other people. As humanists, we are never fully satisfied with nature, but we learn to live with it honestly.
תקוותי בי, איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בך, וגם בך, איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בך, וגם בך. Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? Strength is in me. and in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me, and in you, and in you.
Shabbat Shalom. As in the traditional Jewish service, our humanistic Jewish liturgy expresses the longing for peace. Yet, while tradition evokes an imagined peacemaker in the high heavens to make peace upon us, our text reminds us that peace is an exclusively human responsibility. There is, however, no universally agreed upon humanistic perspective on war. Some believe violence should always be avoided. Others hold that sometimes war is the only way to impede greater harm. Despite our differences, humanists are united in a commitment to promoting peace, first and foremost, by working for it in our own lives, within our communities, and among our nations. We also agree that nations committed to secularism and real democracy are best suited to promoting dialogue that reduces tension and increases the mutual understanding necessary for peaceful coexistence. Though we all long for peace, throughout recorded history, human beings have always engaged in warfare. This makes it difficult to discern whether or how it can ever be completely eliminated. Whatever else we humanists may believe about war and peace, we agree that the outcomes of our choices are our responsibility alone. Let us endeavor to make peace in the world for ourselves and all people.
Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts to all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight we extend our well wishes to these members of our community, to Lee Bricker, to Saul Foreman, and to Jim Walker. If there's someone whom you're thinking about tonight whose name you'd like to share, start in the back there, Suzanne. Thank you. Barbara. Anybody else on this side we missed? Anybody over here? Thank you. Do we miss anybody? May all who suffer know that they are not alone, that we are there. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a complete recovery, refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits.
מקום הכוח בתוכנו, מקורות הברכה מחברותינו. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Mekom hakoach betochenu, mekorot habracha mechavrotenu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Shalom.
Death cannot take that which is locked in our hearts. With our tears, in our sorrow, we remember. With our courage and our strength, we do not forget. Acts of kindness, deeds of courage will remain. Beauty created, wisdom shared, is not lost. With our tears, in our sorrow, we remember. With our tears and our sorrow, we remember. Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, we observe the art sites of the following members and loved ones of our congregation: of Dale Boski, Armand Creed, Ruth Davis, Edith S. Fox, Edwin B. Grauer, Louis Haas, George Harris, Maurice Jacobs, Violet Jacobs, Ida Kingston, Henry Crystal, Barbara Luria, Belle Matthews, Dorothy Nolish, Harry Oberstein, Gerald Primack, Ann Surratt, Edward Stowicki, Phyllis Weeks, and Joseph Winchell. If there's someone whom you're remembering tonight whose name you'd like to share, again, we'll go around the room. Anyone on this side?
Barbara Gross.
Anyone else? Anybody over here?
Izzy Heffler,
Thank you.
Marcia Gilroy,
Thank you.
and Jane Goodall.
Thank you. Did we miss anyone? Yehi zichram livracha, we say. May their memories provide us with blessings. May it also provide us with comfort. If you can do so comfortably, please rise as together we recite our humanistic interpretations of Kaddish. Nit kadal v'nit kadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each in our own way take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. Well, tonight's just like a little fun lecture. You can even applaud for it if you want afterwards. I don't care. Not a sermon at all. But I think it's a topic that I think is worth exploring. And how many, I'm just curious in here, know some Hebrew? All right, so a few people. A couple in the back there. I hear you guys have a couple of words of vocabulary too. Nachon? We're going to talk about Hebrew, not just as the ancient language of our people, but also as a living language. And we're going to talk about it not as a fossil that we dug out of the might have felt like that, but about what it means to us from the time of its inception and adoption by our people. I guess we created it, so I guess adoption wouldn't be the right word, all the way to today. So let's go to slide 2, Arthur. We're going to talk a little bit about the history. So now this is the language chart that I was forced to learn in linguistics class. I had a minor in Hebrew studies. And I think I actually memorized part of it. But this is the Semitic language. So this gives me an opportunity to talk about the word Semite and Semitic. There is no such thing as a Semite. Let's be real clear about that. And there's no such thing as a Semitic race or anything like that. There is a Semitic language group. That Semitic language group is very big. It covers many, many different kinds of cultures, goes back tens of thousands of years. It is a Proto-Indo-European language like ours, but that's about as close as it comes to ours. That goes way, 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 way back to the inception of language as far as linguists are concerned. And it covers a whole bunch of languages, many of which are no longer with us, and a few of which are quite prominently with us. It is broken into 2 groups. East Semitic, which basically covers Babylon and also covered Assyrian and Akkadian, was the major language that came from there. And West Semitic, which goes all the way to Ethiopia. So Amharic is one of them. And then these different West Semitic branches, well, they bring us to modern South Arabian languages, not Arabic, older South Arabian languages. They bring us possibly through a central Semitic line to Arabic and modern Arabic dialects and Maltese. And the Northwest Semitic line brings us to Amorite, Ugaritic, Canaanite languages, Aramaic languages, of which there is only one that is currently spoken, but it is spoken right here in this town, too. What's the other one?
Chaldean and Assyrian.
I think they're the same thing, but I could be wrong. I was thinking of them as the same thing. But then again, I'm talking about Hebrew tonight. So, look, they say that Ukrainian and Russian are different languages, right? A lot of times these are just dialects divided by a border. That's one thing I do remember learning. But we're here to talk about the bottom one, modern Hebrew, or Hebrew in general. And that's what we're going to spend some time on tonight. These Semitic languages, all of them related, began thousands of years ago, probably the major branches at least 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. It's hard to, really come up with a year because we don't have written documents that go back as far as we want, and writing is the only way we can preserve languages because for some reason, none of their tape recordings survived. Linguistically, Hebrew is close to other languages that you might have heard about too, like Phoenician and Moabite. And we see these things not only in the Bible, but throughout history, these different groups of people and their languages. They have things in common. Now, I don't have a slide for everything, and these are some of the things that they have in common. And this is important to understanding if you've ever learned Hebrew. Many of you might know this. If you don't, it's a very interesting, important fact about Hebrew. Every single word in a Semitic language grows out of a root, usually consisting of 3 consonants. That's the entirety of it. So I'm going to give you an example of a word you know. Shalom. Shalom has a root. The root is shin, l, lamed, and mem. Those 3 letters, shin, lamed, and mem. Now, what does it come from? Well, the basic root understanding of shalom is completeness, wholeness. So you can talk about completing something and it'll fit into a certain template that this shin, lamed, mem will work in. It can be attached to names. Yerushalayim may have in its Yuru part, maybe city, but in its shalayim part may be something like city of peace or city of wholeness or completeness. All of these kinds of words, there's hashlama, to reconcile with somebody. Shalem simply means something complete. And shalom, of course, we know not only means peace, but hello and goodbye, but only because it means peace. What it really means is peace. And it's my new son-in-law's name to be. Here's another word, kof, tav, vet, k-t-v. So that could be, somebody said ketubah. Ketubah is the written document it's a wedding agreement, right? A marriage agreement. So ketubah comes from that. The word michtav, so a kof can be a chaf too. Michtav is a letter. We have lichtov, to write. Kotev, I write. A woman would say kotevet, or we'd speak about a woman, kotevet. Katav, he wrote. That's another word you might have heard of. Katav, though, can also, in Arabic, it extends to other words. Kitab means book. Maktab means office, literally a place where one writes. Not every one of these Semitic languages creates the words or created the words, this was a natural process, out of the roots that are similar to another language, but you hear that the katab in Arabic and the katav in Hebrew are still related. Another feature is the interplay between consonants and vowels. So you probably know Hebrew is written without vowels. It's not entirely true. There are a couple of consonants that fill in for vowels from time to time. But the vowels are really part of a template system. They call them the binyanim, which I guess is best translated as building blocks. So, for instance, and there are millions of exceptions, there are ways that you build verbs in all the different tenses, in future and in past, out of these various kinds of verbs. So we've talked about katav. So for me, it would be ani kotev, I write. A girl would say ani kotevet. A group of people, anachnu kotvim, we write. And everyone knows that that format, that template, is going to apply to all of the particular words in that set of building blocks. And that's how we do it without vowels. And it also applies to nouns as well. Now, most of language is simply just learned. And the reason that exceptions come up is because people didn't invent this, they evolved it. And that's about all I can say about it. The vowels that you see in the letters today, I'm going to talk about those later, but they were invented way, way, way after Hebrew was spoken and written for already thousands of years. We'll see how that works. A third hallmark is the shared vocabulary and sound patterns, and you'll notice it if you've heard Arabic, you'll sometimes hear a word, if you know some Hebrew, that sounds familiar. And sometimes you'll hear more than that one word. I always notice when they say we, because they say anachnu, and that means we in Hebrew as well. Hebrew also has another word, anu, which is a sort of a short, ancient, kind of a literary word in many ways, but they didn't apparently evolve that word. So when we say that Hebrew began as a Semitic dialect, we're referring specifically to one place, and that's Canaan. I have spoken about this before, and I know it doesn't fit with what the Bible says, but the people of Israel were by and large native to Canaan. The stories of coming from Mesopotamia may have been about others joining. The stories from Exodus from Egypt were certainly about others joining. These tribes came together, but the roots of the people were Canaan, and that's a different lecture. All right, let's go to slide 2. Most of what we know about ancient language, the next one there. Most of what we know about ancient language, of course, comes to us through writing, but writing is a much later invention. Before alphabets, you probably know this, people had different ways of writing it. Sumerian, Mesopotamian languages were written in cuneiform, which is on the left and bottom of that red line that I so poorly made. And this is a very complicated writing system, made with little wedges and some kinds of pictures. I mean, this was a lifetime of learning. It's not a wonder that we know how to invent and create computers, because the brains that could hold this are the same human brains that hold that. It just took a long time for the technology, and also had to survive a lot of wars because we set ourselves backwards a lot for that to happen. But this is a very sophisticated system. And then you look above and you see this, there are hieroglyphics in other cultures too, but you see this is specifically Egyptian hieroglyphics, the close-ups there, and those usually, not only though, represent words in themselves, but they also have indicators, whether it's a thing is a people or a place or something you eat or something you drink or something a person is doing. There were hundreds and hundreds of these. There are other hieroglyphic systems too that have developed into, I would call them sort of pseudo-alphabets. Japanese and Chinese are very good examples. They used pictograms, which are hieroglyphics, to depict really every word. And today, Japanese has reduced it, but there's still thousands of characters that are used from the old pictographic system. And a lot of the alphabet are really different combinations of consonants, and it takes forever to learn. The head of our movement, Paul Golan, his children are also Japanese, his wife is Japanese, and they go to a Japanese school to learn Japanese. And I always want to point them out as exemplars when our kids, and we don't teach it here for reasons that we don't have a Hebrew school, we have a Spinoza family education program, but we make it available to people if they want it through self-learning. It's 22 letters, folks, 22. There's like 1,000, and they have two alphabets, one for foreign loan words and one for words kept in. Well, I'm not here to talk about Japanese, but when you think about what those kids have to learn and what our kids have to learn, 22 lousy letters, a bunch of dots, and maybe 5 letters that come in a final form, but are the same damn letter. And we let them learn them with vowels. All that said, I was in Hebrew school for 4 years, and it amounted to 6-7 hours a week from the time I was, 9 until 13, like most of us who did Hebrew school. And I'd had my bar mitzvah, and by the time I was 15 and thinking about it, maybe I want to learn Hebrew instead of Spanish, instead of continuing with Spanish, and I couldn't remember one damn letter. Not one letter. I had to go dig up my old books. It is hard. I presented this one here of hieroglyphics because you see where the orange arrow is? That's actually pointing to the first mention of Israel, stating that the Egyptian, we know exactly the dating of it too, 1208, I think. 1208, 1205, 1200 something. Not off a lot, BCE. And it says that Israel has been entirely destroyed. Its seed is no longer. So I don't think seed meant like their crops, although a couple scholars do. This is talking about what, rumors of our death are premature. But there we are, right in that. All right. Let's move on. Because this is really long. So one of the things we know about this, it was not phonetic. It was not an alphabet. So here's a fun fact. Every single alphabet that exists on this planet was invented once. They are all variations of the one that I'm about to talk about. And guess who invented this? I can't claim Israelites, but Canaanites for sure. Semitic Canaanites invented this. So how did this happen? Well, the story that I've recently learned, and it's been substantiated, and I did not know this because I always attributed it to the Phoenicians, and they did develop one of the first systems. But it really had to do with a group of Semites, West Semites, let's say from Canaan, from Israel, from that land, found themselves working for the Egyptians in Egyptian-controlled mining areas in the Sinai. And it was archaeological discoveries that led to this new theory, and I think it's more than a theory. Having nothing else to do when they weren't mining, apparently they began to adapt certain hieroglyphic symbols that looked like something to them, they were not Egyptian speaking, to phonetic sounds in their own language. And these sound signs became the very first alphabet. Every single other alphabet that we have came from this. And I'm going to show you how it worked. Let's look at the next slide. Well, actually, go back one, because this did have some interesting stuff on the left. This is actually the ones that they discovered that were recently done. All right, so the ones I believe on top are the ones that the Semitic group invented, and then just underneath is what we call Proto-Hebrew. The letters that you know of as Hebrew now are much later, derived from this, but they actually came from a Syrian script much later. They just decided to change over. All right, now let's go to the next one, and I'll show you the evolution of some of them in just a moment. So here's what became Phoenician up on the upper left. So I want you to look at on the upper right box there, or you can look over here. These are the same, you see, right? That one and up there. So those are a letter Aleph. Now, if you know how to write Hebrew in cursive, it actually still looks like this today. It's a line with sort of a little C next to it. But a lot of Israelis actually write it like that. I've seen it. So this is what happened, that they took the ox head, alpu, in one of the versions of a Semitic language, meant, or Aleph too, meant ox. And so they adopted that as the Aleph. Now the Aleph it doesn't have a sound, but it does. It is what's called a guttural stop. Like when you hear Cockney speak, like a little, right? That where the right before the L, and that is a consonant. I know it's not our consonant, but it is a consonant. A lot of us say that, just in informal speech. All right, now go to the next, and I'll just give you a little sample of how it went all the way through the language. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so here's a great example. So here on the left, you see a hieroglyphic. And there you see the Proto-Sinaitic. Those were what the miners came up with. And then how it becomes Phoenician. And then early Greek. And you see how closely related they look to each other? And then Greek becomes this. And Latin, which resembles Greek in many of its letters, which is the alphabet we use, is there. So the thing that looks like a hand at the bottom is related to the word kaf, which means hand. Well, it means palm today, but it means hand, and it goes all the way through to the kaf. And then the modern Hebrew, which is actually a Syrian script, also looks like what developed from this as well. But for the first many thousands of years of Hebrew writing, it was the one in the middle there where it says Paleo-Hebrew that was our text. So when you see Moses coming down in a movie and it looks like the things on the right, that is very, very inaccurate. And also Moses didn't do that. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, because I had 45 pages of notes and I'm not going to do all these with you. And all right, so this is the first sample that we have of Hebrew writing, and it is from the 10th century BCE. This is called the Gezer calendar, and it is a list of agricultural duties for different parts of the year, representing the seasonal cycles of farming. So I can't read the Paleo-Hebrew. There's a few letters that I recognize just from giving lectures like this. I can see a dalet there and some other things. But I can't read that. But I saw it translated into Hebrew characters that I can read, the modern Hebrew script, and I could read what it said. Now, it's not in modern Hebrew. It's not even in biblical Hebrew. It's in a Hebrew so old that we're not sure it's Hebrew. In other words, we're not sure if it is where the split between some other ancient Semitic language occurred. It could be an ancestor of Hebrew. It could be, an ancestor of Hebrew and Hebrew are going to be the same thing, because language is split because of geography. And then they become different languages, and the more they're apart. All the Romance languages in Europe are Latin, but none of them sound anything like Latin except in Italy, a little bit the Spanish, but not so much. But when you study it, you begin to realize these are all connected. English is way harder because it's Germanic, and it also has French, and it has this, and it has that. That's why English is such a flexible language, because its entire thing is that it's a mutt. And it's a very, very interesting mutt. And it's one of the reasons it's so hard to learn, and one of the reasons it became the international language. So it's not religious. It's not anything other than telling you when things have to happen on the calendar. Now, was this really a calendar? Was it really someone's notes? Many scholars believe this was a practice thing for some kid who was learning how to become a scribe, because writing literacy was a rare thing. Now, there's a lot of argument going on among scholars exactly how rare was it. And there is some thought that among the Semitic peoples who developed the alphabet, it became less and less rare much earlier than we thought, because it's 22, 23, 24, depending on which language you're talking about, letters. And that is not that hard to learn. And when you speak the language already, the lack of vowels is not the same problem it is if you're a kid in America trying to learn to speak it, because you already know that kotev means I am doing something. So if it's talking about somebody who's doing something, writing, then you know that that's how you say it. It's automatic. So this is the birth of the alphabet. This is the birth of Hebrew literature. It's a little bit underwhelming, to be sure. I'll give you something that's a little bit more fun. As soon as I find my, here we go. Okay, let me move ahead. All right, here we go. Let me move ahead. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is actually another very early Hebrew text, and this one's a little bit more fun. This comes from the 8th century BCE. This is called the Shiloach, or Siloam, you might sometimes see. The Shiloach, or as I'll call it, the Hezekiah's Tunnel inscription. Who's been to Israel and visited Hezekiah's Tunnel? All right, if you've been to Israel and haven't visited Hezekiah's Tunnel, you have to go back to Israel now and visit Hezekiah's Tunnel. And if you haven't been to Israel, you should go to Israel. It's very nice. All right, so what was Hezekiah's Tunnel? In the book of Kings, the second book of Kings in the Bible, we learn about how Assyria, the kingdom to the north of Israel, the north and slightly east of Israel, has captured and destroyed the northern of the two Israelite kingdoms, Israel, and is now on their way to Jerusalem to destroy them too. Israel, that became the so-called 10 lost tribes. We never heard from them again. They were taken away and they were gone forever. Judah survived this attack by the Assyrians. Judah survived it, according to the Bible, in two different places, because the king, Hezekiah, was very, very, very tuned into what the Assyrians were about to do, and he made all kinds of preparations, and he also got lucky. The Bible called it a miracle, but he got lucky that the Assyrians had to go back to deal with some things closer to home. We know all this is true because the Assyrians attested to it. You can go to the British Museum and see these enormous, enormous wall panels from their palaces, which I know people say, well, why is it in Britain? Well, ISIS would have destroyed it by now, so let's be glad it's in England. These tell the story of the Israelite king and the destruction and the whole thing, and the Bible tells us about how Hezekiah managed to save, and there's a lot of detail in it, and then there's one little throwaway. The other events of Hezekiah's reign and all his exploits and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought the water into the city are recorded in the Annals of the Kings of Judah. Now, that's a book we don't have anymore. So maybe they went into some detail there, but they certainly didn't go into detail here, and nobody ever believed this had anything to do with truth until they started digging, and they dug and found, and there's the steps to it, they found the tunnel. And on the tunnel was that plaque. The tunnel is very interesting. It's very wide at the beginning and very narrow after you get halfway through, because the idea, and these brilliant engineers, but they didn't have the kind of tools that we have today. The idea was they were going to meet in the middle and start on the different ends, and they did. And it was like, the last spike in the railroad here. It was a miracle that they did it, but it wasn't. And here, and I'm not going to read all this to you because I can't read it anyway, but you can see it's in that Paleo-Hebrew as late as the 8th century. And the Bible was written in this script, but it's a Hebrew you could easily understand. I can understand this when I read it in modern script. But it's discussing how they did it. We started on this end, and we did it on that end, and we met in the middle, and this is how it happened, and it's praising, I think it praises Yahweh at some point. But in any case, this was a great, great accomplishment. But for our purposes tonight, it also tells us that this Hebrew was in regular use. It is not that different than the one we have today. It is intelligible to people who read it. All right, let's move on.
What was the tunnel for?
The tunnel was to get the water in the city.
Oh, so
Yeah, they were being attacked. They had to get the water into the city. They had to create, sorry, I didn't say that. There was a well, and the well was outside the city. And to get the water in, you had to dig a place for the water to flow into. And that's why they needed the tunnel. And you can walk through that tunnel today. Now, it is true that the kingdom of Judah was saved from the destruction of the Assyrians. But the Assyrians, who were not saved from the destruction of Babylon on them, disappeared, and then a new enemy rose. And just a few hundred years later, in 586 BCE to be exact, Judah was finally conquered by the Babylonians. Babylonians had a different policy. They did not destroy and disperse and bring in new people. They simply took all the wealthy people and enough workers for what they needed to do, and they brought them to Babylon, and they let them set up shop there. There was a king in exile there. Ultimately, the Persians are going to take over from the Babylonians and let the Jews come back. But during this time, particularly at the end of the Babylonian period, Aramaic, this language called Aramaic, which is still spoken in one or two dialects today and very heavily by the Chaldeans here, and they're the only ones that I'm aware of that are speaking this. This language became the lingua franca of the entire region. It is very similar to Hebrew, but they are not perfectly mutually intelligible. They weren't then, and they are not now. It is one of those situations sort of like Portuguese and Spanish, or maybe Portuguese and Italian. I don't know how far apart they are. But they're far enough apart that they're not mutually intelligible, but they are easier to learn if you live in a Semitic environment, Semitic language environment, and that's what happened here. And it's that big, giant area that sweeps all the way through Israel, the top of the Sinai, all the way through the inhabited Mesopotamian region, up to Anatolia, today's Turkey, and way out to Persia even. This was a widespread language. Huh? Well, Greek, yeah, but that's way later, and that doesn't really affect the story of Hebrew too much, although I am going to mention it. And so when the Jews came back, Aramaic was very much their language too. And they continued to sort of be a little bit bilingual about it. But they were not speaking Hebrew on a daily basis. It was now a holy language. The Bible was, well, the entirety of the Torah was in Hebrew. 90+% of the rest of the Bible was in Hebrew. Different kinds of Hebrew from different eras in which different parts were written. Sometimes they're just subtle enough differences that you can date something that might have been here or there, and that they're mixed into one text. Sometimes they're really different. Prophetic Hebrew, for instance, what the prophets spoke and so forth, and you see differences. That's more difficult for me to understand than Torah Hebrew, which is much more what I studied. But it's all intelligible with a dictionary. But there's little pieces of Aramaic that came in, notably in the book of Daniel, and a little bit in Ezra, which was with the book about the return. So there are traces of Aramaic in there too. So Hebrew now is not the only Jewish language. And for more than 1,000 years, Hebrew and Aramaic are going to live side by side. And this goes all the way into the Greek period. And Greek, of course, becomes important, but Aramaic continues to be the language that Jews speak amongst themselves and most of the nations there. We know that because by the time the Romans are coming in, the Jews are still speaking Aramaic. And the Jews are speaking Aramaic for hundreds of years later. They don't forget Hebrew, and they absolutely know how to read the Bible, but Aramaic becomes so embedded that there are even important prayers that we say in Aramaic. Well, we don't say them, but you know. Can you think of the Kaddish? The Kaddish is in Aramaic. It is not in Hebrew whatsoever, except for Oseh Shalom at the end. And you can hear that it sounds different. And our little Nit Gadal v'Nit Gadash Baruch Hadam, I'm not even sure that's any language. I have no idea where that came from, and I figured I can't write Aramaic, and this is in Hebrew, but it sounds like some kind of weird marriage between the two, so why not? Let's just take it. But on the other hand, this means nobody really understood it as time went by, but it means everybody understood it when it was said, which tells you something, too, about the importance of understanding certain things. The halach ma'anya, the bread of the poor bread, that passage that said in the Haggadah, this is the bread of the oppressed, let all who are hungry come and eat. Well, that is in Aramaic too, because they wanted people, the rabbis did, to understand it, to understand this obligation. The joke is that nobody understands it, because nobody speaks Aramaic, at least not in the Jewish world anymore. Anyway, these two languages sort of crossbred, and there emerged a distinctly Jewish dialect of Aramaic. And so that Aramaic is different, and I've compared notes with some Chaldeans than what we find, for instance, in the Talmud. Now, I do not speak Aramaic, but I know enough Aramaic from learning Talmud to, as if I have a Hebrew translation, to know what I'm looking at, because the languages are that close. And the Hebrew translation is ever so much more helpful for me than an English translation, because the Talmud is really difficult to begin with, and translating it to English is always a problem. The Kol Nidre is also in Aramaic. Other kinds of languages like that too. So what happened to Hebrew? Well, Hebrew had a life that continued, mostly as a written language, and mostly as a language of learning, because that's how you learn Torah. And so it began to become mixed. The next slide. So it became the language of the sages. So this is a page of Talmud, a manuscript of Talmud, not the Vilna edition. The Talmud is mostly in Aramaic, but it switches over to Hebrew like that. The Talmud is not a book someone wrote. It's a compilation of hundreds of years of debate about basic laws that were primarily in Hebrew in a part of what became the Talmud called the Mishnah, and the much longer sections of the interpretations, and the interpretations are legalistic. They are sometimes also lore, but the lore, midrash we might call it, that fills up the Talmud is this much compared to this much, which is law and logic and trying to extrapolate and compare and so forth, and arguing and arguing and arguing. You know, when you hear, recently I've been hearing anti-Semites quoting from the Talmud to show that the Jews hate the Goyim and all this kind of thing. But what they're not understanding, of course, is that might have been something someone said. And someone quoted this recently in a podcast, and I got a whole bunch of stuff in social media, which is how I learned about this. And they left out all the rest of the stuff where the rabbis who were engaged in this conversation called the guy who said that an idiot, and that's not how we treat people, and this kind of thing. You know, you skip that stuff, you've kind of missed it. And anybody tells you they read the Talmud, nobody reads the Talmud. That's not how it works. You learn Talmud, and even if you're doing it at the best rate possible, it'll take you 7 years to get through it. If you do a page a day, guided, and that's super speed. And they do this every 7 years. The Jewish world starts the Talmud over again, and you can join in on that learning anytime, because there's no beginning or end to it. You can just come in at the beginning of a tractate, but it's in Aramaic. But the Hebrew is so strongly there. But there are other language influences in it too. Some of the rabbis wind up having Greek names. And a lot of Greek names and Greek ideas wind up in the Talmud and in normative Judaism, what we call now rabbinical Judaism. Some pieces of syntax were absorbed from Greek, even from Latin words from time to time. Somebody was sending me an article today about, because it's the parsha, the portion of the week is Breshit, it's Genesis. And so there's talk about Adam. And somebody had written an article, this is old news to me, but the rabbis talk about Adam having been created, it says androgynihu, meaning he was androgynous. Now that's not a Hebrew word, but it is a word that became Hebrew, androgyni, for the rabbis who were writing this. It certainly wasn't Aramaic. And those names persist. My own granddaughter's name is Alexandra. And that is a Greek name, but it is also, it's not her Hebrew name as it turns out, but it's also a name that you'll find among there was a queen in Israel towards the latter part of the Roman, the early part of the Romans, who had a name like that, Alexandra, something to that effect. All of the Hebrew that we have, not the Aramaic, but all of the Hebrew, with just a few exceptions, is pretty intelligible today. It is much more intelligible. I don't know how to read this, but this is Chaucer. Juan that April with his showers sute, the drogta of March hath person to the rota, and bathed every vena in switcher liquor. I listened to this I'm doing a make-believe of something I heard on YouTube, of which virtue engendered is the fleur. Anybody understand that? Huh? No, this is actually the Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales. I couldn't understand this. Shakespeare is hard for me, but Shakespeare to modern English is closer to a lot of ancient biblical Hebrew and rabbinical Hebrew to modern Hebrew. The distance is not that far off, maybe because it got frozen. And the language did freeze, and that's probably what preserved it. One of the ways they managed to preserve it, next slide, they managed to preserve it by coming up with vowels. And this was something really important, because for people who weren't speaking the language regularly, and they so revered the text of the Bible that they wanted everything to be exactly as they had learned from tradition, they decided to sort of freeze the pronunciations. Because one of the fun things about Hebrew, and the rabbis still play with this, is when there's no vowel, sometimes you can make something mean a little bit something different. And you can do more plays on words, and those plays on words can sometimes legitimate interpretation. They still did it, but they would ultimately have to come back to this. So they invented several systems, but this was one particular system that caught on. It was around well, it really took several hundred years before one was decided on. So it was around the 8th, 9th century CE. That's not that long ago. So this is the one that they landed on. And they're basically A, E, I, O, U. But there's also combination sometimes with a consonant that'll lengthen it. You know, remember maybe when you were in grade school, we learned it. What are the vowels? A, E, I, O, and U, and? And? You didn't learn sometimes Y and W? Well, we learned that. We were more aggressive. We were more progressive. Well, the teachers are nodding. Audrey knows what I'm talking about. Like in how. Like, how do you get from ho to how, right? Ho. So that's a diphthong, but it's also the W serving. We have this in Hebrew, and they use it sometimes as a placeholder. When they write Hebrew today, they write it sometimes a little bit, they take some, it's not liberties, but they take more advantage of some of these placeholder consonants in order to make it a little bit more readable. And you can see how it's done there. So there's shalom with the vowels, and also the indicator of the shin, which they didn't need. They knew what a shin and a sin, what the difference were. And there it is without any vowels. And we even have a number of fonts. I meant to put cursive there too. Now what about these things here? Well, this group invented these too. You know what these are? Those are musical notes. That's trope. Vayomer shalom lachem al tirau. And that was terrible, but I do know it. I just have to always start at the right note before I can make it work. And by doing this, they kind of saved the language. Because even though they didn't write in it all the time, they now began, and with the invention of the printing press, it became much more prominent, to insert these vowels into all of the holy texts. And while they didn't do it to the Talmud, a lot of people find that it's useful to have even that today.
When I was learning my bar mitzvah, HaTorah, those...
Yes, and they represent different notes for different... Right, so the Torah trope is different. So you might have heard, well, just consider the blessing for the Haftarah. By the way, not related to the word Torah, not at all. It's a different T. Baru da 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 da. But the Torah is da 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 da, and then there's probably a dozen alternatives and different within Ashkenazim, between Ashkenazim and these different Mizrachim and Sephardim and so forth. And you don't have to learn it probably. You probably just memorized it when you were a kid. But when I was in rabbinical school, they did make us learn it. Believe it or not, Reform rabbis learned how to do trope. Yes. And thank you. And different holidays have different tunes. Now I can tell you, unless you're really a professional at this, you don't know them all. And a lot of them are easier than others. And a lot of it is BS'd. I'm not going to lie. But what really mattered, next page, in keeping the vocabulary alive, next slide, Arthur, was the fact that it was used also for correspondence and for books and so forth. So when Rambam, Maimonides, in the 11th century, writes his own law code, he writes it in Hebrew. And in fact, in Hebrew, easy Hebrew that he figured most Jews could understand. And Jews learned Hebrew. We were extremely literate. Extremely literate. Many a Jew would have known Aramaic, Hebrew, and whatever the native tongues were around them. My father-in-law, blessed memory, certainly did. Here's a letter on the left, and you can see how beautifully it's written. They also created all kinds of polyglot languages. Judeo-Arabic is such a thing. But more famously, Ladino, which was a Spanish language that borrowed words, and Yiddish, which was a Germanic, kind of a goulash that borrowed words. But the Hebrew ones were different, because the Hebrew ones were Hebrew that borrowed words, not a Germanic language that borrowed Hebrew. And that's why we're not talking about it. But poetry was written in this kind of Hebrew. And we did a thing last year where we had that wine party. I think it was on February 14th. And we read some of those poems. Some of those poems are really hard because they would make up words or borrow words from antiquated Arabic just to fill it in or make it sound. I think they were playing games with us is what I think they were doing. And there were some of these poems, piyutim they called them, and some of them were very pious. I had a professor who used to say that there were the ones, and they're a very big part of the high holidays. Not here, but in tradition. That's why they're so long. Hold on one second. That there were ones that everybody can understand. There were ones that only scholars could understand. There were ones only he could understand. What do you want to say, Jonathan?
Wouldn't you say that Hebrew was always actually spoken? It was always a literary language.
It was a literary, and that's what I'm talking about now. So when while a Jew from Yemen and a Jew from let's say France weren't necessarily going to be able to get together, and if they could speak Hebrew, speak Hebrew, they might even sound weird and funny as they did, because the pronunciations were different. But they could write to each other in it, and let's face it, that's how everybody was communicating, was in writing. And so it became very much more a literary phenomenon. But people did chant it, and there were different pronunciations. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go to the next slide. So when do we begin to see a revival? Well, this happens really as early as the late 18th century. I think I have here Moses Mendelssohn, living in Germany. He wrote, and it's a pious work, but he wrote a commentary in sort of his own Hebrew. It's a modern Hebrew, but it's not modern Hebrew, on the Torah. There's a science text, though, over there. You see all those contraptions and things. And Echad Ha'am was writing in Hebrew. Asher Ginsburg was writing in Hebrew already in the 19th century with essays about his ideas about Zionism. And so there were others too, Nachman Krachmal. I think that actually might be his book there on the lower left, because he wrote science books and also poetry and so forth. They wanted these people to prove that Hebrew could express modern thought, that it wasn't just a language of faith. But nothing really caught on until some Jews started to return to Israel. And that's the next slide, please. That happened with this guy, Eliezer ben Yehuda. Now, I could sing the song about Eliezer ben Yehuda. I was here like 15 years ago visiting, and Harriet Meza was teaching the kids about Eliezer ben Yehuda. Eliezer ben Yehuda, he's not the inventor of Hebrew, but he is what we call the father of modern Hebrew, because this guy was really committed. Theodor Herzl had suggested that only German would be appropriate for his new envisioned Jewish state, because of the language of culture. And after all, what are you going to do in a modern country if you want to order a train ticket, right? Well, in Hebrew, there's no Hebrew for train or ticket. Well, Eliezer ben Yehuda was well aware of that, but he also was a Hebrew scholar, and he knew how Hebrew words were built, and he started to build them. And he spread them through this magazine, this newspaper, which is one of the first in the first in modern Hebrew, called Hatzvi, the deer. And he starts to spread them. He sends his children out in the street of Jerusalem to test new words. There was one I learned about, maybe Dory, you know this, so I'm putting you on the spot. Tizmoret is orchestra, right? And there's another, I think he intended that to be one word, and his children got it wrong, And the one he wanted to be orchestra, do you know what the other word was they used? I'm going to look that one up. But sometimes his kids would mess it up. And sometimes people just didn't do it. Sometimes they just continue to do loan words. There's still an academy of Hebrew language that coins words. And all the Hebrew words I don't know come out of there. Because by now they've all just become English words, right? But because English is, informs everything. But I did want to show you this dictionary, because I had this dictionary. I won it in a contest. I subscribed to an American Hebrew newspaper. It's called Yisrael Shalanu, back in the 80s, the early 80s, when there was no internet, and I wanted to be able to learn Hebrew. And I entered the drawing, and I won and it still sits in a place of pride in my office. That's going with me, wherever. So he shows up in Ottoman Israel in 1881, when Hebrew is no one's mother tongue, and he is determined to raise his children only speaking Hebrew. And he did it. And this paper he starts publishing in 1884. It's the first regularly published Hebrew newspaper, at least in Israel. And as I said, it became a laboratory for him. But this was not uncontroversial. Most of the Jews who were living in Israel, Palestine as the Ottomans and the British called it, at the time, who had come there as early as the 1880s, most of them who were already there were Orthodox. They'd been coming for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years back. Some with the mystics movement, some just there to worship. And there were a lot of them. They were highly impoverished, and they were very, very, very pious. And they did not like Hebrew being used as a secular language. They were violently against it. And when I say violently, they caused violence about this. His paper was actually banned by the Ottoman authorities several times because the local rabbis pressured them to do it. They believed that this was all subversive, it was all heresy. But by the time the British took over in 1922, they recognized Hebrew as an official language. And that shows you how much things had changed. If you look at any of the documents that came out then from the British, it was always with Hebrew, English, and Arabic, always. As for the ultra-Orthodox, well, they mostly accommodated themselves to it because they all speak modern Hebrew today, and their newspapers are in modern Hebrew. They have Yiddish too, but Yiddish is the minority. The majority, it's Hebrew. But I have to tell you an interesting story. I could have told this any place, but I wanted to do it here. I don't know if you'll find this interesting or not. The Ashkenazic ultra-Orthodox, and I have seen this in America too, not just modern Orthodox, not just ultra, sometimes the modern Orthodox too. When they pray, they do it with the Ashkenazic pronunciation. And when they speak, they do it in modern Hebrew. And I witnessed this in person in 1984-85 when I was living in Israel. And we used to go down to the wall, all the students who were there, our seminary and everybody, it was Hebrew University. And there was this guy who would pair us up with families all over Jerusalem. And I got paired up with this Haredi guy whose family had been there for hundreds of years. This wasn't some newcomer. And but they were Ashkenazim at the root. He had a little boy, all the women were in the kitchen, and that was all of his daughters. He had one kid who was a boy, 8 years old. Well, he must have been 13 at least, because he led a little bit of the davening. So he's running around, speaking street Hebrew everywhere you go. I'm learning it, I'm listening to it, I know what he's talking about. And then it's his turn to say a bunch of prayers, some psalms or what have you. And he goes from to and I couldn't believe this. I felt like if you were in Georgia and in Atlanta, where they speak, sort of the way everybody seems to speak today, but when you went to church, then they suddenly started talking like this. And maybe they do that, I don't know. I never went to church, but this was the funniest thing I ever saw. Anyway, let's go to the next slide.
What was their language, their common people?
Whatever their country was.
Aramaic?
What are you talking about?
Okay, you said that.
We're thousands of years past Aramaic now.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in the 19th and 20th century now.
Yeah.
All right, well, if you can't, ask me later. All right, so this is kind of what they did. I just wanted to give you a couple examples. This is what Eliezer ben Yehuda did. He took these different roots and he made new words out of them. There was this word chasham. Nobody knew what the hell it meant, but it was in the book of Ezekiel, and it seems to be talking about some kind of divine energy. And he slaps a lamed on it, and chashmal becomes electricity to this day. Herzl, you want to buy a ticket? He took a root that was adopted from Greek. Now, mostly they're 3 letters, but sometimes you can have a 4-letter root. It's a rare thing, but sometimes you can. And he changed it from kartas, meaning perhaps paper, chartes, chart in English. So these are words we have. And he changed it to kartis. And on it went. Lirkov, rochev, means to ride a horse. Well, he put it into a certain kind of building block and yielded rakevet, which means train to this day. Later, they took the word think, chashav, and put another mem in front of it for a thing that does something, and it became machshev, computer. And there's Tizmoret that I talked about, from zemer, meaning tune. And they went on and on, and he went on and on with this, thousands and thousands of words, all of them related to something else. And by the way, I don't think they use the word litalfen. Do they still use that? They do use it. Okay. I haven't heard it recently. But litalfen, can you guess what that means? Litalfen? Litalfen. To telephone. To phone someone. I guess they're still using it. Litalfen. So they took an English word and made a root out of it. And that's how this happened. Out of this, next slide, grew an enormous amount of literature. And the reason I gave you coins and stamps and things to see here is because some of the most prominent of these people were honored because of the literary tradition of Israel, and I mean Israel, us, and Israel, the state of Israel. Chaim Nachman Bialik, that's it. He became the poet laureate of Israel, and also wrote essays and other kinds of things too. Leah Goldberg, we've used her poems here. She's a beautiful poet. Shal Chernikovsky, he was famous for translating Homer and Goethe into Hebrew. Rachel, the poetess, and our only literary Nobel Prize winner, and that's the Nobel Prize with his face on it that he was given, Shin Yud, or Shai, as we call him, Shai Agnon. And I've read some Shai Agnon novels, and they are not easy because the Hebrew has changed, but they are absolutely comprehensible. And I'm sure children in Israel, they might struggle with it, like I would maybe struggle with Faulkner, but I think they get through it just fine. And from there, huh? What?
Hebrew is very unique.
It was unique. Well, that's why I said Faulkner, because his English was unique, but perfectly intelligible, even if it was him playing with the language, because it is unique. But at the time, there were lots of unique attempts. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. And here it's a modern language. There's a copy of Yediot Achronot. I don't know what year it is, but that is still the major paper in the country today. One of 2, actually. And then Yediot Achronot on the right. This is a modern one. And this is the everyday language. This one I really love. This is some graffiti, which basically says, keep calm and carry on, in Hebrew. But you've got, down at the bottom there, where you can walk your dogs. Up here is a supermarket thing, the green thing. That's Stimatsky. That's the big bookseller there. And the bookseller there, also a big publisher as well. The Israelis read more books per capita, I think, than almost any country in the world. Yeah, they are a highly, highly literate country. Street signs, well, those are city signs in the upper left. The upper right, just mundane things like women's room and employees only, that kind of thing. It's a language. It's a day-to-day language. You can curse in it. You can do anything you want in that language now. And that's what I love about it. I've always been obsessed with Hebrew since I decided at age 15 I was going to switch over from Spanish to Hebrew. And it just became a great love of mine. It took me a long time to learn it. I didn't become remotely fluent until about 20 years ago. And it was because of the internet, because I was able to watch television with Hebrew subtitles so that I could hear this from the speed of the language, and I kept voluminous notebooks. I didn't have an iPhone in 2005. Voluminous little notebooks writing down all the vocabulary. And today I can read novels and so forth. I forget sometimes words when I'm looking for to speak them, but when I see them, I know them. Not time. Wait, go ahead.
The forward. The forward.
Forward is a Yiddish.
Language.
Forward is Yiddish. Forward had nothing to do with Hebrew. Yeah. The only thing that's Hebrew about Yiddish are the letters, which were borrowed. The vowels are different, and because it's a Germanic language, and the words that are Jewish in it are borrowed from Hebrew, obviously, the way we do, right? I mean, you know, nobody says, go put your prayer shawl on. They say, go get your talit or your talis.
Interesting, some of the notes, the small things, like what to do for a student who forgot to take his Ritalin.
Oh, yeah. Ritalin. Well, what, did you have to come up with a new word for everything? All right, so I want to talk about one last thing with this. So you all know that Hebrew sounds different everywhere because Hebrew began to be pronounced in different places, not as a spoken language, but as a holy language, and it was always being influenced by the people and the languages around them. So Ashkenazic Jews in Eastern Europe, they borrowed I forget what you call it in English, but where you have the emphasis on the second to last syllable, right? Which is what we have in English. Most English words, the syllable is not the last syllable is not emphasized. It's the second to the last that's emphasized. It's not a rule. It's just as a guideline. That's mostly what it is. They now having the vowels in place, even those began to stretch and change a little bit. So, for instance, shalom was sholem, like sholem aleichem, or shalom aleichem, right? Aleichem was what they would have said in Eastern places. Aleichem is what they said in Europe. And they had different ways of doing consonants. Some of the consonants, when they take a dot in the middle, a dagesh in the middle, in ancient Hebrew they changed. In Yemenite Hebrew they preserved some of that. A dalet, for instance, does have that thing. But the only people who did it were the Yemenites. They would do a zalet and a dalet. Okay, and we don't have that. Nobody has that. And then there were things like the tav and the sav. So the sav just disappeared out of Hebrew completely. And it became a Sephardic thing, and they just used that Sephardic. They used it's a mixture of Sephardic and Ashkenazic Hebrew in modern Israel. But in America, we say things both ways. We say Shabbat Shalom, and we say Gut Shabbos. Now the Gut is clearly German or Yiddish, but Shabbos, that's how they would see it in Hebrew. That's not a Yiddish pronunciation, it's the Hebrew pronunciation. There are also consonants that are different. There's ch, which just goes for chetz and chafs and everything, but if you're a Sephardic Jew, you say chet, like the Arabs do. If the ayin, we say, so we're talking about Gaza a lot, right? So why is it Gaza? Because in Arabic it's Gaza. It's a heavy glottal stop. The Sephardic Jews can say it that way. The Mizrahi Jews say it that way. Now, as the generations pass by, it's becoming less prominent. It's also very class-based, just like in England, where you can tell, what neighborhood someone's from and how they talk. Here, that's disappearing because of the internet. I know kids from the deep south, they speak exactly the way that I do and you do, except for the y'all, which is a very important word. Because you guys that's not going to cut it. And then we had this last phenomenon here in America where we invented a brand new kind of Hebrew. And we named all of our religious institutes after a young woman named Beth. With all due respect to my friend Beth, who should be proud of that name, Beth is not a Hebrew name because there's no TH whatsoever in any version of modern Hebrew or even medieval Hebrew. So where do they get that from? B'nai Brith. Where the heck does that come from? It comes from the fact that in Germany they would put a TH for a S. So Base or Bess became Beth. And that's where we got this damn woman's name. Not you. Not you. She predates you. predates you. We got Queen Elizabeth's name in all of our synagogue. How about that? Anyway, that's just a little walk down the history of Hebrew. I hope I didn't take up too much time for it. You can clap for that. That's not a sermon. That's a more Hebraic fanfare wasn't possible. Anyway, next week we'll hear from a real Hebrew speaker, Lior. Please tell your friends about it, and let's have a good audience for her. This is a really special occasion for her to come, and she's doing it at this time when she's still thinking about things back home. All right, let's conclude with this song. I think you made your point, Maestro.
Introduction. May we know peace as we go on our way.
We be guided by love.
May we be blessed with love and joy.
With this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom.
May we be sheltered by the wings of peace.
We abide in safety and in love.
May
Grace and compassion find their way to everyone. May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom. I want to thank Judy Boski, who sponsored tonight's Oneg Shabbat in memory of her beloved husband, Dale. Thank you. And I want to thank Joseph for the beautiful music, our friend David for the streaming. He's now back over there. Arthur for the slides, and all of you for coming. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Vevenu shalom, shalom, shalom aleichem. Vevenu shalom.